I'm Hoople's Cat. Welcome to the second video on first responders from lecture 10 from the When Everything Fails series, Surviving Anything. This one contains a lot of actually specific technical jargon and detail about first response. Overall, I don't think it's got a huge utility for general people who are prepping, but if you're interested in first response and the itty-bitty minutiae of it, this is a good lecture to watch.
I'd like to start with 911 dispatch centers, which are also known as PSAPs. That's PSAP, an acronym for Public Safety Answering Point.
PSAP, how may I help you? Call PSAP now!
Prior to 1968, there was no centrally available emergency number in the United States.
In the United States until 1957, there was actually no push for a national emergency phone number. It was fire services that wanted it. I believe it wasn't until 1968 that the first 911 call was made in the United States of America. And intriguingly enough, it was made from the great state of Alabama. Now, 911's a bit of a cheat. The United Kingdom invented the emergency phone bypass number in 1937 in London, and it quickly spread nationwide. And you dial 999, 3 nines. That's pretty easy to remember, and you don't have to move your finger in the rotary dial systems that they had at that time. 911, you have to move your finger. So I'm not quite sure why the United States didn't adopt 999. It actually is a much safer and better number to use, specifically when you're using rotary calls.
The number to call for emergency services varied from place to place.
Be advised, it actually doesn't apply nationwide in the United States or Canada. There are still small areas that do not use 911.
Funeral homes handled medical transportation, which may sound either ironic or disturbing, but it was a common practice at the time.
This was a lot cheaper and more convenient than developing an ambulance service, and before the development of basic and advanced life support at the scene, actually worked well.
Enhanced 911, or E911, was implemented that added what's known as ANI-ALI. More acronyms that stand for Automatic Number Identification and Automatic Location Identification. These allow for the phone number and physical address of that phone number to appear on a screen when a caller dials 911.
They can figure out where you are calling from. Now, if your paranoia is to the point where you don't want 911 that you're calling to know where your location is, I can't help you.
But things have changed with the advent of digital technologies. Today, it's not unusual for 80% or more of calls to 911 to be made from cell phones, especially as so many persons are discontinuing their landlines. The location of a cell phone caller is not always easy to identify. So now there's implementation of what's called Next Generation 911. This will allow more rapid identification of cell phone locations, integrate more fully with voice over IP phones, which utilize internet connectivity rather than traditional telephone lines. And when fully implemented, it'll also allow for texting to 911 and possibly even submission of photo or video files. But it's not in place everywhere just yet. 911 may be operated out of a police department, or it may be operated out of a regional authority that serves multiple jurisdictions. Of course, don't call 911 unless there's an emergency.
I could and possibly should make an entire video on this topic, but here are a few notable morons that I managed to glean from a quick search of the internet. Sit back, listen to a little bit of music.
Here's what to know if you do call 911. The first, most important piece of information that they need is the location of the emergency, as well as the location within a location. That is, if it's a large building, what part of the building is it? If it's an apartment building, what apartment number? The second most important piece of information to give is what's going on, including whether anyone is hurt or in danger, or if any weapons are involved, and they'll do what they can to help.
Beware, a lot of times 911 operators will demand that you stay online. As a hospital administrator, I had to disconnect a few times from the 911 operator because I was forced to call them because I couldn't get anybody else to do it in a timely, appropriate manner, but I also then had to deal with the situation before the arrival of the first responders. So, yeah, tell them why you're disconnecting though, and listen to their response. Don't just go, I'm going. put the phone down. They will respond to the call anyway, but it's always best if they send the right units to the call.
I've had to call 911 for a house fire.
I was thinking about this. I think I've called about 4 times in my life outside of my work situation, like at home or wherever on the road, 911. I was able to include details like pupils are sluggish and respiratory rates 8. And that actually guides the appropriate response to come at a technical level. Like, I'm not saying you need to be an ICU nurse or a doctor to call 911. What I'm saying is if you give them actually detailed advice, like if you're calling because somebody's had a car accident, where is it? The location's always going to be first and foremost. But are there any injuries? People are injured. People are severely injured. It doesn't really cut it. If you say things like, they're not breathing very well, there's blood in their mouth, they have their eyes open but they're not responding to me. Be specific about what you're looking at. That will guide the response you get.
The first responders, because they're often the first public safety professionals that interact with the public.
So when you call 911, treat the operator with respect, the same respect you would give a police officer who's standing in front of you with a gun. Regardless of how entitled or special or angry or frightened you are, try and remember that the 911 operator has done this many, many, many more times than you have, and they know what they're doing.
Often, there's another operator listening in on the call who is actually dispatching responders to your location as you're talking. You'll probably hear typing in the background. 911 centers use what's called a CAD, or computer-aided dispatch, in which they enter incident information. The dispatcher may ask you to stay on the line or may give you instructions for actions to take. If they do, listen carefully and respond accordingly.
But say why not if you have reasons not to do it.
Police departments often arrive at a scene more quickly than other agencies because they're already in cars in the community waiting to receive calls for service.
Be aware that at any given time there's hardly any first responses on the street compared to the percentage of the population. And at night and weekends, snowstorms, flu epidemics, this number actually will decrease.
Policing is very fragmented. There are close to 18,000 law enforcement agencies, and almost 3/4 of those are relatively small, with fewer than 25 full-time sworn officers. A sworn officer is one who carries a badge and a gun and has arrest authority. Sworn officers have to be certified, which requires police academy training that's usually around 6 months, followed by an average of 3 months of field training in which new officers ride with experienced officers for on-the-job instruction.
If you want to be a healthcare aide in Canada, which is non-regulated and not nurses, but work in hospitals and care homes and people's houses, giving them healthcare aids like washing them and moving them around, you have to train for about 6 to 12 months full time. Most police officers are generalists. Very few of them work in CSI.
They have to do traffic stops, disaster and crisis response, crime prevention, initial crime scene investigation, and more, moving seamlessly from one task to the other while working what's often a 12-hour shift. There are just over 400 agencies nationwide that have 250 or more full-time officers. In larger agencies like these, there will be a lot of specialized units. With the fragmentation of policing, there are many different agencies. You may find that there's a municipal police department, a county police department or sheriff's office, a state police presence, and perhaps specialized agencies like transit police, campus police for schools or universities, airport police departments, law enforcement for federal installations or military bases, and more.
A colossal and huge bureaucratic mess. They all have to work together very, very well under conditions of stress. They have to have clear leadership across the lines of the agencies. They have to know what they're doing. They have to train for it.
While we think of law enforcement's primary role as being related to the prevention and response to crime, they also play a key role in disaster response. They may work alongside rescue units, transporting injured persons, helping with evacuations, assisting with search and rescue, or other tasks.
Indeed, they have a tough job. They will get frustrated and fed up doing a job that they have to do.
You are also likely to see a fire department presence at a disaster, and for more than just fires. Like policing, firefighting is fragmented. There are almost 30,000 fire departments nationwide. Unlike policing, firefighting tends to be centered at the local level, cities, towns, and counties, rather than having state or federal firefighting organizations.
In Canada, it costs most of your taxes to pay for fire services, and that cost as a percentage is increasing, by the way. Funding and structure of first response may have to change as austerity and the economic recession continues.
There's also another key difference between policing and firefighting.
Yes, most people generally feel comfortable around fire services, By the way, I have a fire services hat and I was going to wear it at this point in the video. However, kiddies took it to go running with. Maybe I'll use it as a thumbnail when it comes back to me. But it's important in SHTF to have people comfortable around you. That's why I have my RN pin, and that's why I have a fire services hat. The crew gave it to me, and I like it.
Of those almost 30,000 fire departments, only about 9% are fully staffed by full-time, paid, career firefighters. About 71%, over 2/3, are entirely volunteer. The remainder are a blend of career and volunteer firefighters. One challenge facing the fire service today is the difficulty that some volunteer departments are having in recruiting new members to keep their forces at full staff levels.
From what I can find out in Canada and specifically in Ontario, if you see a green flashing light, you have to pull over and give them right away because we know they're a volunteer fire service person going to attend a fire, either directly or going to their station to collect their pumper to go to the fire. When I'm reading about the United States, and you guys and girls can correct me, I don't think it's enforceable that you have to pull over when you see the green flashing light. I think it really should be.
Whether volunteer or full-time, firefighters are usually certified with a minimum of 2 courses, which you'll hear referred to as Firefighter 1 and Firefighter 2. Taken together, they comprise close to 6 weeks of full-time training. What do firefighters do? I know we all have the image of the fire station with multiple garage doors concealing different types of fire trucks, an alarm bell ringing, firefighters running to slide down a pole and hopping on board, hanging off the back of a truck to rush to the scene of an emergency. That's a pretty inaccurate image, actually.
I don't know, I thought it was well known that fire service personnel spend most of the time rescuing cats.
But what firefighters do is respond safely but quickly to scenes, to address a variety of different types of call for service. The goal, of course, is to knock down the fire. There are also fire trucks or ladders, which carry a variety of ground ladders that can be set up against a building, a wide variety of rescue tools, and a large aerial ladder attached to the truck. The aerial ladder is approximately 75 to 100 feet tall, although some may reach as high as 137 feet. Assist with other types of incidents, like elevator rescues. Knocking down the fire is putting it out, which is accomplished after an attack. At a fire scene, you may see a group of firefighters that appear to be standing and not actively engaged in a task. It may be a crew that's being rehabilitated, that is, being rehydrated, cooling off, and catching their breath before resuming work. Or it may be what's called a rapid intervention team, on standby to rescue any other crews that run into difficulty at the fire scene. Safety first.
So shouting and yelling at them to rescue people isn't helpful. Stress and fear and limited understanding of your own limitations means that people will gather at fire scenes and see crews not doing anything and shout at them. We live in a very odd society with entitlement, and people believe that they are specialists in areas that they are not.
Rescue engines to perform extrications of persons trapped in a vehicle accident, specialized units to respond to hazardous material calls. There are units to respond to confined space calls, in which someone is trapped in a small and dangerous location. Fire departments assisted with rescue both in the Air Florida crash and the Washington Metro incident.
From experience on quite a few occasions, I can tell you fire services in Toronto really love smashing doors and windows, and when you give them the go-ahead to do it, it makes their day.
If you go to your city's or county's webpage, there will probably be a link to the police and fire department. If so, that link will probably contain information about the types of resources and services that the departments offer. Take a look. Fire departments in particular justifiably like to show off their engines and trucks and to identify their capabilities.
I am no longer in Newmarket, Canada, but I'm using Newmarket, Canada because I'm familiar with it because I used to live there. Cities spend a lot of money on this sort of stuff. Of course, the more rural you are, the less net support you'll get for all of these ideas, but they're always worth looking at.
Knowing what first response resources are available in your area can give you an idea for what types of responses they may make and how they can contribute in case of a large-scale disaster. Fire departments also tend to have open houses during Fire Prevention Week in October. If there are tours, stop by. It's a great way to get to know your local first responders.
But not during a pandemic, eh?
Police and fire resources are 2 of the 3 primary first responders. The third is for medical emergencies. Call rescue, get the medics, contact EMS. In the case of a medical emergency, these are the agencies ready to go. But again, let's talk about some specifics of how they're organized so you can understand what resources are available in your area. As I mentioned earlier, at one time, funeral homes ran medical emergency calls. Before modern ambulances, which also may be called rigs, buses, trucks, or other terms depending on where you live, a hearse was of sufficient size to transport a person, and some were equipped with red emergency lights.
This was really common, and it morphed over time into specific hearse cars that were actually painted red or white with lights on to actually make them ambulances. So the funeral director in a big city, for example, or in a rural location would have the black hearse and would also have a white or a red and white one, or even a red one, as an ambulance. They were basically ambulance funeral directors. These dedicated hearses that were really just a little bit slightly different from their normal ones morphed over time to give the big box on the back so you could actually be in the back with the person, and eventually modern rigs where you actually have two people in the back if you need it, and you can work on the person like you're almost in an emergency department.
Emergency medical services vary in their organization. Some are paid, others are volunteer. Some are provided as part of a fire department, others are standalone agencies, and in some cases, private companies.
The world makes it at 2022. I can see formalization and reduction of volunteerism in things like fire services and police and a lot of other things becoming more and more. It's going to be registered, it's going to be regulated, it's going to be employed.
There are essentially three types of emergency medical vehicles. They are basic life support, or BLS, advanced life support, or ALS, and airborne units, such as helicopters. The difference between BLS and ALS is essentially one of the scope of care.
Yes, but if you need advanced life support and a basic life support crew shows up at the scene, they may come first anyway, that's fine. But if they're not sending an advanced life support crew until the basic life support crew comes and makes the assessment, that's a failure of your part if you make the 911 call. Give them enough detail, make it specific enough, so they know if they need to send oxygen, or if they need to send a defibrillator crew, or if they need to start an IV, or if they have possible chest injuries, or abdominal injuries, or head injuries. Give them enough information that they actually can deal with it on the phone. Don't be generalized. Like I said, they're covered in blood. Rubbish, garbage. There's a lot of blood, it's still coming out of their head, and it's pulsating, and I can't stop it. That is the sort of information that makes the difference between what you get in response than just saying, they're covered in blood, come straight away.
BLS is often staffed by EMT basic personnel who receive up to 150 hours of training. ALS is often staffed by paramedics who receive up to 1,800 hours of training. Depending on the state, there may also be intermediate ranks, such as EMT Intermediate or Advanced EMT. Helicopters are usually used to transport patients from a lower level hospital to a more advanced facility, or to be deployed to the scene of serious incidents to allow more rapid transport to a hospital. In addition to a pilot, they may be staffed with a flight nurse, a respiratory therapist, or other specialists.
So I'm going to do a third video on Lecture 10, First Responders, because he talks a lot about hospitals and emergency department care and how that's changed. And I actually get what he's talking about, having worked in and around emergency departments since 1984. And I'm now retired. So I think it's always a good idea to take some of the history and look at it. So it's going to be a bit of a dive into hospital care, and I'm going to add in my own stuff, you know, how to navigate hospital care when you don't understand what's going on, and a few other things like that will be in the video. Hopefully you'll find it useful. If you did find this one useful, please feel free to share it, subscribe and give me a thumbs up, or not. If you want to click on the super chat button and give me all your money, that's great as well. I will spend it unwisely. Have a great day. Toodles. This is a Hungry Cat production 2022. Treats! Treats! This is a Hungry Cat production 2022. Closely observed by Hungry Terrier production.